Alright, so this is the one that I thought of when it was like, okay, we can probably drag this on another month.
Yeah.
So...
But it's paying tribute for another month, too, so it's not really dragging it on. We're still doing a lot more, like, the high spots this month, honestly.
Yeah, and it gives me... I was able to think of other ways to use the movies that... Some of his really more beloved roles are in here as well, so... as I said, well, eventually I've covered all his Oscar nominations with the exception of The Fisher King, which I wish I could have paired with something, but nothing really...
We may or may not still have Robin Williams versus in the future, but this is the end after this month.
Yeah, it might be, like, somewhere down the road it might be The Fisher King and another Gilliam movie, just in general.
Could see that.
But now we're going to start with, we have Hook, of course, and we have P.J. Hogan's Peter Pan movie that came out in, like, 2003, or maybe somewhere. And we're going to start with this one. When I first saw it, I didn't care to see it in theaters because it didn't look all that interesting. I was kind of somewhat intrigued by the way it looked in the trailer, but for the most part, it didn't really, scream out at me. So I just kind of waited for it to come out. I watched it on demand, actually, when it came out. And I was not a fan. I was not a fan of Pan. So that's, we'll see what Joe Wright can do in October, but...
I think he'll be fine.
Next month, holy shit.
Good lord.
We start off and we have, this is the real Pan story. I grew up on Hook. Like, for the longest time, the only Peter Pan story I knew was Hook. Really? So I had to kind of catch up on the whole Wendy and John and Michael and all that.
Not Disney, not Mary Martin's version?
I saw those much later.
Wow.
Yeah. So I saw this, and immediately its appearance grabs you, at least. It's the appearance of it is like right straight out of a storybook, which is nice. The effects are a little dated now. I watched it again to catch up on it to do this video. You're welcome. It looks, some of the effects are dated, but for the most part it still looks fine. But obviously the main story here is the one where Peter Pan comes in. Peter Pan is Jeremy Sumner, who was the younger brother in Frailty, if I remember correctly. That's how I knew him going into this, so this was fun, to say the least. Once you've seen Frailty, you know what I mean, but... and we're doing the Wizard of Oz thing. We have to have the actor who eventually is somebody in the other world. Jason Isaacs is playing the opposite of Captain Hook before he's Captain Hook, playing Wendy's father, who is actually very meek and lets the world walk all over him, of course. And when this movie begins, you kind of know it's a mess immediately. There's a lot of people in it, though. Olivia Williams is very good here, and very... kind of angelic in like a motherly way, as their mother, obviously. And Lynn Redgrave is in this, playing their... shit, I can't remember. She's the aunt, I think. She's the one that's basically kind of saying, Wendy, you must grow up and come with me, and we'll... It's like a monster movie, the way her hand comes down on her shoulder, and she's like, you will come with me now, you cannot play with your brothers anymore. And the whole thing is that Wendy needs to grow up, so that she can go to the land where you don't need to grow up. All that bullshit. You know, and this movie starts off. When this movie starts off, it's a mess. It really is. It's like scenes are just kind of spilling out at you all at once, and every scene is going by really, really rapidly, and it's just a whole bunch. Now I get it that there's also a total silliness to it that doesn't feel fitting, but at the same time I think it's supposed to be, because the whole idea is that children need to grow up. Mm-hmm. That's the whole point the adults in the movie are trying to make. And the movie itself in the long run. Maybe. I don't know. But the thing about it is, it would kind of make sense to kind of have this... The movie has a childlike mind at the beginning, where everything is frantic, everything's moving quickly, things are really silly and kind of stupid. And just it's very slapsticky. It's just all that. And the issue here is, eventually, of course, she does meet Peter, and they all go to Neverland. And they go through space, they do all that. It's nice. It's a nice scene, effects-wise, when they go to Neverland and their whole journey there. But once they get there, this is when the movie seems to become a little confused. Because judging by the way they take an approach to this movie, for starters, this was kind of when things were starting to take off, and it was becoming popular to make things the darker version of stuff. It's not quite as out of control in that sense as stuff is now, or as try-hard is what I think I mean. But there are some things in here that make you realize, I think we were supposed to see this as a darker version of the story. Where they added stuff like, we actually see Hook's disgusting nub of an arm before he puts the hook on and shit like that, which is only there for, like, you know, to scare children and shit. To make people say, you know, oh, this is a new Peter Pan, this is making me, you know, all the shit Joe Wright's saying right now. I'm really after that movie, and I try to wait and see what happens, but it just...
The trailer looks good to me, personally.
Well, and the thing about it is, and of course, I mean, Jason Isaacs is a really good casting choice, and he's fairly decent in the part. It's just that once we get there, this movie really just, this movie's a chore. That's a big issue. And it's what, like, obviously, when you're doing a pirate movie such as this, that's going to have, you know, swashbuckling and action and all that stuff, you kind of expect something really grand, especially since we're already been introduced to this world that, like I said, looks straight out of a storybook in appearance. But when Hook and Pan come forth, and obviously the rivalry is there and the whole story is going down now, it all kind of becomes a clusterfuck. And the first time we get this action scene where the kids have been taken hostage and it's Pan versus Hook and they're doing their thing, it's really cluttered, and there's not a whole lot to... It just doesn't have much of a focus. And I think the main reason here is the fact that, as I said, our director is P.J. Hogan. I don't know if you recognize his name, but he did movies like My Best Friend's Wedding and Muriel's Wedding, and he did a movie I loved a couple years ago, Mental, with Toni Collette. It does not seem like this type of movie is kind of what he is a specialty, per se. That's why he went back to making movies like Mental. Because when you look at stuff like Muriel's Wedding or My Best Friend's Wedding, beloved as those movies are, do you see action, adventure, fantasy, pirate movie when you look at the styles of those movies by any chance?
You look at Kevin Smith movies, do you see horror?
Yes, but what I'm saying is I think P.J. Hogan's talents are a little more confined than maybe the studio that gave him this movie thought they were.
Fair enough, I can see
However, some people really took to this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Some critics really did. A lot of audiences did. I know a lot of people that liked this when it came out, and I was baffled. Because I just this was never a movie I took to, and there's some things I don't know the like the story itself, like not just this or the animated movie or all that. I don't like the story itself. I don't know what's in there and what's not in there, so I don't know what's new. And I don't know what they've added or what is being faithful to the story. But there's the thing like Hook flies. That seems like something the movie added. I don't know if that happens before or not, but I kind of thought that was a cool idea in retrospect. Like, you know, the idea that Hook can fly with Pan and they can, like, you know, battle aerial style and shit like that. The movie just doesn't have a very good way of executing it. Everything just feels really thrown together and clustered together, and it's just not a movie I'm a fan of at all. We do have Tinkerbell. Obviously, Tinkerbell's portrayed as a fairy, obviously, that can't speak. She can just say, you know, like, and she just makes expressions. And she is well played. She's well played by the one, oh my god, what's her name? The girl in Swimming Pool. I cannot remember her name for the sake of my life now.
Levine Savigny?
That might be. And she's Tinkerbell in this movie, and she is a good choice.
Oh yeah, it is.
She actually shows nice physicality, even if, like I said, it's silly and slapsticky. Maybe that's the way she's supposed to be. I don't know. But for the rest of it,
close.
I don't. I just was not a fan of this movie. I said it's a good idea, I'm sure, and they really tried, you know, with the appearance and everything, but it's just not a movie I've never been able to get on board for. I thought, because I haven't seen it since it first came out on demand, whenever that was, which was probably 2004 or something. So there has been plenty of time for it to grow on me. So when I watched it again recently for this video, I was optimistic, wrongly, because my opinion really has not changed at all in like 11 years. So that's a bummer. But we do have Hook, which is baffling to me because this is a movie I grew up on, and when I say that, I really mean it. I have probably seen this movie 150 times. And it's one of those movies where it's 2.5 hours long. I can probably tell you every single line of dialogue from beginning to end in chronological order. Just everything about this movie. I have known this movie front to back for literally as long as I can remember. And as far as I know, everybody that I've ever met has favorable things to say about it. It's usually a favorite among most people I come in contact with. But there are people that don't like it.
Really?
Mainly the critics don't like it, and Spielberg himself does not like it. He was very, very disappointed in the outcome, he says. And he still, like, today even, he stands by saying that. And that's just baffling to me because, like I said, I don't know if I'd feel differently about it if I didn't grow up with it. I know it's a hard thing to kind of try to decipher, but my opinion of this movie is just permanent, and we just have to deal with it. Because it could have been one of those movies I grew out of, but it wasn't, by any means. What's interesting in this, it kind of takes, like, we're kind of jumping ahead in time because this was 1991, but when you look at it now, it kind of takes, like, a meta approach to it, because the movie begins with, obviously, Peter Banning, this lawyer, who's kind of a douchebag, who is Robin Williams' character, is actually the adult version of Peter Pan. He just came out of Neverland, grew up, and then forgot about his past life, and became a lawyer. Had children who he neglects, had a wife who he doesn't really seem to care about, and he's just constantly on the phone. And the very first scene of the movie is them at his daughter's school play, and the school play is Peter Pan. And then there's references throughout the movie where Maggie Smith's character, who adopted Peter, is Wendy from the story. And there are references throughout it of, is the play actually about Wendy's life, or is it just a bunch of coincidences with names? But the main child character is Jack, who is his son, who he neglects the most. Like, at least he was at Maggie's play. He abandons pretty much everything Jack does, and it makes Jack super, super resentful. So, there is a really great scene where, and there's also a bunch of foreshadowing and callbacks and stuff like that. Like, the dog's name is Nana, like it is. There's the mirror of, the scene with, like, the scene in this movie, and I'm assuming also in the story, where there's a foreshadowing where Wendy's dad tells her she needs to grow up. Mm-hmm. There is the similar scene between Peter and Jack on the plane. And there is the, there's actually kind of a callback to it when Tinkerbell has to come in and get Peter and take him to Neverland. It's kind of like Tinkerbell is acting as Peter for Peter, the way Peter was with Wendy when he took her to Neverland. It's kind of, he's on the reverse side of it now. And all that. And of course he's been drinking all night, so he thinks when he first sees Tinkerbell he's having a drunken hallucination. It's interesting to talk to you about this movie because I don't believe you've seen it.
Hook?
Yeah.
Oh, I've seen Hook.
Okay.
I've never seen Pan.
There's another movie I was thinking of where you haven't, but I can't think of what it is now. But, yes. And then we have, there's also some really great foreshadowing involving the plane. I don't know how many people catch this, but it's kind of one of my favorite things. It's a little cheap, but it's kind of one of my favorite things in the movie. Of course, Dustin Hoffman plays Captain Hook. Mm-hmm. Well, when they're on the plane going to Wendy's house, and they're going through turbulence and everybody's trying to eat and everything, and Peter's freaking out because he hates flying. A voice comes on the intercom, and it's the pilot, saying, like, turbulence calm, stuff like that. It's Dustin Hoffman's voice. And of course, it's Dustin Hoffman's voice saying, "This is your captain speaking." I mean, I know it's cheap and seems really obvious, but I still just love that little detail. What kicks off the movie, of course, is the foreshadowing. There's also a lot of foreshadowing in regards to there's the thing where Peter keeps doing the stance a lot without realizing it, especially when he's in the window and, you know, being afraid of windows and telling Jack not to open them and stuff like that. They got bars on their windows at home, apparently, is what we hear Jack say. There's actually a painting of Hook on the wall. But then finally, what throws the plot in is they come home from the ceremony and they see this scene that plays almost like a horror movie, where Hook comes for them as a green light of sorts. Is how we see it, and things move by themselves and things get... It's like Poltergeist. And then they come home and they see what appears to be Hook has walked through the house and just run a giant scratch down all the walls. And then left a note with a sword in it, signed by him, that he has taken the children and he wants to fight Peter Pan one more time. So he has to go with Tinkerbell to get his children, which you all know this because everybody's fucking seen Hook, and everybody, I would think, love it. So if you're watching this, I would like to think that you do. Otherwise, we're not friends. So...
Probably haven't been friends for a while now.
So, let's talk about Dustin Hoffman here. Because the whole casting, some people think some things are a little stretching, but the casting in this movie is just perfection. Dustin Hoffman seems like maybe an odd choice, especially since he was fresh off his second Oscar win, probably when this went into production. But the thing that I love was I was barely alive when this movie came out. I was not even a year old. I'm assuming it was the summer of '91. But I went back and I watched some of the special features on this particular DVD. And the really cool thing that I noticed was, it seems like, obviously this was before, you know, just movie news was just out for everybody. They completely shrouded Hook in mystery in the trailer. They did not show him at all. The first time, I'm assuming the first time audiences ever saw him was either on I believe the original poster was just the Hook.
Yep.
And so when you went to the theater and you saw it, your very first look ever at Dustin Hoffman as Hook was when he says, the mewing spawn, how I despise them, and turns around. It's the first time you see him like that.
I got a gasp when actually I saw it in theaters.
Yeah, that's right, you would have been like 10.
Yeah.
And you realize how glorious it is. First off, I love, they play at the fact that obviously Dustin Hoffman has a famously small stature. So he has the shoes that have really high heels in them, and he has the stairs that have to have the carpet on them, and just things that always blow him out of proportion, basically, and make him seem bigger than he is. There's even the line at the end when Peter's fighting him, and he says, "You know, I remember you being a lot bigger." And but the interesting things that they do with Hook in this movie, what they do with this character, where he's, without Peter Pan to fight, he's basically become washed up. Like, I don't know, they only make a couple of references to her. I think we are under the assumption that he's killed Tiger Lily by this point.
It's possible.
Because there's the one reference where we see, Peter sees it as an appendix scar, but Smee says it's from the Tiger Lily incident. And then there's the scene where we realize why Hook is so depressed and hates his life without Peter Pan, and it is because he's killed so many Lost Boys and he's killed so many Indians, which is what I'm assuming is he killed Tiger Lily at some point, because there's no other reference to her. To the point that I know this is a touchy subject in this particular tribute, but one of the more humorous aspects of this is the fact that Hook is literally suicidal. He actually, and we're supposed to, it's apparently a thing that's happened so many times, where Hook goes in and grabs a gun and says that his life is over and points it at his head, because Smee's response is, "Oh, not again." My favorite part of this is when he finally stops him, and just barely stops him before the gun goes off, and just Hook's delivery of, "Don't ever frighten me like that again, Smee. What are you, some kind of a sadist?" just the whole thing with Hoffman and Bob Hoskins as Smee, which could not have been better casting as well. There's Julia Roberts as Tinkerbell, which a lot of people find very questionable, apparently including Spielberg, who called her Tinker Hell on the set and never wanted to work with her again, and as we can see, has not since.
True.
I think she's still got it in the role, I think. Like, I think she doesn't get enough credit for her. A lot of people think she's really, really miscast and really wrong for the part, but I've always, like I said, though, I don't know if it's because I've always seen Tinkerbell that way because this is the movie I grew up with. Maybe that has something to do with it. A lot to do with it. This was my introduction to Julia Roberts. So, I don't know, it's hard to tell. Funny thing about Maggie Smith. Obviously Wendy's supposed to be very old and very aged. So when we see Wendy, it is Maggie Smith under makeup. But because of this movie, because for a long time, probably not until The Sorcerer's Stone did I see Maggie Smith in another movie, because she didn't make movies I watched at that age. When I saw Hook, I was just under the impression that Maggie Smith was very old. So when she showed up in the Harry Potter movies, I was kind of shocked. I thought she was aging backwards. I had no idea that she wasn't actually as old as she appears when she plays Wendy.
Nice.
But of course, the main thing here is Robin Williams as Peter Pan. As we saw, where a lot of people don't like Francis Ford Coppola's movie Jack, where he actually plays a 10-year-old in an adult's body. But what Robin Williams did really, really well was played characters who basically had the joy and personality of a much younger person in an adult's body. And that's pretty much what Peter Pan has to be.
Yeah.
Especially after he's grown up. And it's really interesting to watch him transition this character where Peter Banning, before he realizes who he really is a real piece of shit of a person.
Mm.
He is not a good dude.
Not at all.
I mean, you can tell he's kind of trying, but he's just so jaded with life for whatever reason. He's become this person. And when Robin Williams slowly makes the transition, he kind of, it's not just he's Banning and then suddenly he's Pan. There is a transition throughout the whole movie as he's training for this fight with Hook when he's with the Lost Boys. And it's pretty seamless too. So you don't really think about it until it's your job to talk about a movie in depth, where you realize his portrayal of Peter Pan is really, that's a real transition the character has to go through in this movie. And he pulls it off really well. And yeah, okay.
A lot of cameos here too.
I'll get through. This is definitely the weird cameo movie.
Yeah.
The first thing I want to talk about is something this movie gets. That's probably the main thing this movie gets criticism for, and that's the Lost Boys. And the reason for that is, once again though, this is what I grew up with. So this movie is kind of how I always saw the Lost Boys. So this is a criticism that's always kind of been lost on me. Where the Lost Boys are basically like these lost jungle kids. Like a bunch of little Mowglis running around. And the Lost Boys in this are basically 90s punk kids.
Yeah.
They got the skateboards, and they got the basketball, and they've got the high-fiving.
That's what you thought the Lost Boys were back then?
This was the only thing I had to go on. So
I'll give you that.
That's the way I always saw the Lost Boys in my head.
Okay, I gotcha.
Leonard Maltin complained that they looked like they were right out of a McDonald's commercial. But that's just how I always saw them, so that's how they've always been to me. So, plus it kind of fits the time frame of the movie, too, that they would be, I mean, I know Neverland is a totally different place. They would not know this, but it just kind of fits the time frame of the movie well, too. And I love, they're actually quite effective comedy relief, too. Like, if I were to see it today, maybe, for the first time, maybe they'd annoy me, I don't know, but for the most part, I think they make effective comic relief. One of my favorite things are the signs, when they're first trying to get Peter to fly with the giant slingshot. Mm. And so they're trying to help him find his happy thought using signs with suggestions on them. So there are these signs, like you'd see it like a wrestling event, and they say like horsies and bugs and gum and what was, not birthday, but birthday. B-E-R-F day.
I've heard of that, yeah.
So yeah, I thought, and of course, you know, he has dialogue with a couple of them, like Thudbutt becomes his buddy and eventually his successor, which, yeah, is questionable. I'm not sure why it ended like that, but I think the whole mother kind of connection they had is probably had something to do with it. You don't have to think that much about it. Yeah, this is the weird cameo movie.
Yeah.
Once this stuff got out, a lot of people saw this movie in a different way. There's the investigator who's in their house after the kids are taken. That is Phil Collins. There is the couple who, they're on you don't see their faces, you see them from a great distance. So much so that I still wonder if this one's even true, but I don't know if they've confirmed it or not. But there is a couple on a bridge that's making out as Peter and Tinkerbell fly over them, and Tink drops some dust on them and they start to float while they're kissing. That apparently is George Lucas and Carrie Fisher. There is Jimmy Buffett is in there as one of the pirates that tries to take his shoes from him when he first gets to Neverland.
With David Crosby.
Crosby is one of the pirates of Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And the one that stands out the most is the pirate in the... I still don't know if there's people that know this or not. Maybe there's still some people that don't. I don't know.
It's possible.
The pirate that betrayed Hook, that he sent to the boo box, that's got the beard and everything, is Glenn Close under heavy makeup. Which is really funny to me because you realize when you watch it now that when she talks, she didn't change her voice. She's very, very convincing, as we saw later with Albert Nobbs. She's a convincing dude. That's just the way it is. And she still is when she doesn't change her voice, apparently. Granted, she only had like 2 lines, but for 90% of my childhood, I bought her as a dude. I never knew. I would have never guessed. And I had probably seen 101 Dalmatians by this point.
I'd say so.
It would have never occurred to me that Cruella de Vil was that fucking pirate. Just no way.
Taking that out of context is probably one of the best lines ever.
It's a nice world according to Garb reunion, too.
True.
So
another thing that's not going to be a part of this.
Yeah, so I could do it with another Irving novel if I wanted to, but
there's one more.
And there's a lot of what am I missing?
You're missing Gwyneth Paltrow.
Yeah, that's not really a cameo though. This was
but that's still cool to have her one of her first movies.
Yeah, she was the young Wendy when she, and then we get that heartbreaking montage where he keeps coming back, and it's like, no offense to Maggie Smith or anything, it's just Peter realizes the way life works when he comes back and she's Gwyneth. He comes back and she's Gwyneth again, and then he comes back and she's Maggie Smith. And there's actually, I've never really noticed it before until recently, but when Maggie Smith turns around and says, like, Peter, I'm old now, all you see is his hand on the chair, but when she turns around, he recoils. And it's like, that's a really heart-wrenching, like, that's the scene when you see as a kid that's really boring, when you get Peter's backstory. But when you watch it now, it's really heartbreaking.
Yeah, no lie.
And you see how he became what he became when he decided to become Banning. It's because he fell in love with his wife. He said, I'm going to leave Neverland and grow up. And what he really wanted to do was become a father, and that's why Jack has been the heart of the story this whole time, is because that's where it started. That's how he decided to stop being Peter Pan and decide to become an actual adult. And some of that Jack stuff gets pretty heavy. There's a pretty ludicrous plot line here where Hook decides to get revenge on Peter Pan, that he's going to trick his children into hating him and basically make them his children. Maggie never goes for it, of course. Smee flunked the maggot. But because Jack has been so betrayed by him so many times, Jack basically accepts Hook as his father. And it is totally ludicrous, but if you want a revenge plot, that's the way to go. And there's a really strong scene here that goes by really quickly, and it's one I never really thought about before. But obviously, another one of the most popular characters in this movie is Rufio, the kind of the head lost boy who kind of took Peter's place after him, who has a sword. They earned respect after the magnificently famous scene at the feast, where the really Spielberg-like scene where they're pretending food is there and there's this big feast there, but there's nothing. But then he starts to kind of find himself again when he and Rufio get into that wonderful battle of name calling that are so long and elaborate I can't even remember them after how many times I've seen the movie. Some of them I remember, but Peter's are clearly the best, with substitute math teacher and substitute chemistry teacher and nearsighted gynecologist. And when Peter finds his way, the feast comes to life and he can see it all. I've always felt like that's a real Spielberg, John Williams moment when we see the whole thing. The guy that plays Rufio, Dante Bosco, I think is his name. He's also famous for Avatar. He did the voice of the prince dude, I think. And
I'll probably hear him.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the show. I know everybody loves it, but I don't. But through all this, Rufio kind of starts to accept that this is actually, because there's always that doubt that he's not Peter Pan, clearly. And this is when Rufio kind of sees him as, you know, it's a slow progression, but he finally realizes this is Peter Pan, and he gives it to him, the sword and everything. And then there's this moment at the end where Rufio battles Hook while Peter has to go save the children. And obviously Hook ends up killing him. But the thing about it is when this whole scene begins, Peter, the whole time is building up to this war with Hook that Peter does not want to partake in. He wants to go there, he wants to rescue the kids and leave without fighting Hook. That's his best case scenario. But the war begins because Jack has gone to Hook's side and doesn't go back with Peter. He wants to stay with Hook and be here, the whole I am home line. And that's what sets this whole thing off. So there's this moment as Rufio is dying and giving his I wish I had a dad like you speech, where Jack is looking down at this and he says, I'm sorry. Whenever I would see the movie younger, I assumed it was Jack saying, I'm sorry for your loss. This was clearly someone you knew, Dad. But I think it's Jack taking responsibility for Rufio's death, which is really fucking deep.
It really is.
Because if he had just gone with Peter, that wouldn't have happened. The Lost Boys wouldn't have even showed up if Peter just had taken the kids and left. They were the backup plan. It just so happened that because Jack didn't leave, everything had to go down. And Jack realized in that moment that Rufio died because he didn't go with Peter. And that's a really heavy weight. Like, they don't even go into it apart from that one thing. But it's there. And that's what it means. And it's really heavy. And yes, if there's one thing about this movie, I do think the action scenes do kind of seem, they're still really fun and really great, but they probably could have used a little, there's a bit of a sloppiness to them, sure, but just still, you know, I can still watch it all day, every day, really. So I don't know, it's difficult, it's very difficult for me to see why critics wouldn't take to it and why Spielberg himself wouldn't like that he created it, to the fullest degree anyway. But there's still it just kind of baffles my mind that people just can't fall in love with this movie. I know it's because of my bias that I've had for life, but I just watched this movie and I feel like it's impossible to not fall in love with it.
Yeah.
I just can't see it that way. Like, I try to understand what people didn't like about it when it first came out, but it's just, my mind just cannot grasp it.
It doesn't
I'm
work.
I'm way too in love with this movie to see what its problems could be. There's a thing where the dialogue I love. Me and my brother, every single time we hang out, we quote this movie at least 5 times. It's just a thing. We don't even really mean to sometimes. It's just such a habit. We just throw quotes out from this movie that just happen to coincide with whatever we're talking about.
That's great.
There is a Hook quote for pretty much anything in life that you are doing. And what's really great is after a while you have to kind of watch it with subtitles to get all of it, because the pirate language is so in full force. It's just the way they compile sentences, it's just really fun to listen to. One of my personal favorites is when, I gotta make sure I get this right, it's kind of a tongue twister, and God bless Bob Hoskins for pulling it off. He points a gun directly at Tinkerbell during this negotiation, and he tells Hook, let me blast this buzzing vixen to pixie hell. That's one I've always particularly loved. While we're on the subject, let's also not forget that we lost 2 great actors in this movie recently, with Emma Hoskins. So it's a double tragedy, but still, this is definitely a movie that I really love both of them in, so it really shines for both of them. As I was saying, you couldn't have asked for a better Smee. There's just no way.
No.
Okay, let's see if there's anything. There's another scene I really like where it's kind of a Spielberg-Williams combination where it's it's a little cheesy, sure, but it's the scene where they're trying to figure out if he's paying or not. So Rufio draws the line and says, "Everybody who doesn't think he's Peter Pan, come over here." And then they go over there and he's by himself with just the kid. And after really looking at him, the kid sees Peter in him. And the score kicks in with that really great note, and everybody crosses the line again back over to him. It's a really, really great moment that I've always loved, which this movie is just filled with. So, yes, and on a technical level, the sets are massive. Like, holy shit. Like, there are some where it kind of looks like it might have been kind of a cheap-looking set that not really went to its fullest, but still, just the whole grand scale of mostly everything we're seeing is still really, really impressive. It ended up with 5 Oscar nominations, with production design, costumes, makeup, visual effects, and song. The song that Maggie sings, which does kind of seem kind of shoehorned in there. It's like, let's at least get ourselves a song nomination, if nothing else. It's still kind of a nice moment that shows that Maggie's the one that's not changing her ways like Jack is. So, yes, I find it impossible not to love this movie, but believe it or not, there's some people that don't. Boggles my mind, I know. But, yes, so this is probably the worst beating a movie's ever taken in regards to one of these, so that's a review of a movie that I've known my entire life, which is the ones I'm usually most worried about doing, because I'm afraid I won't do them justice, but
yeah,
I did my best here, and I think I expressed my love well enough to get it out there, so, yeah. Alright.
This one-sided battle is now over, and next week, Versus will take you back to school. We took you to college before, now we're just going to take you to school, so keep in mind what that may or may not mean. AJ's movie reviews was 2 days ago, so check that out. Check out the other wrestling content on Pop. Check out the Halloween Horror Nights content on Pop. Good God, Horror Nights starts in 7 days. It's insane, isn't it? So, 5 days actually. Now it's Sunday, isn't it? Whoops. 5 days, Halloween Horror Nights. Cannot wait. So, that's all we've got for this week. Check us out on moviepilot.com, and you can also check out our mobile app at Sir Owen Disney on iTunes. All the Pop content in the palm of your hand or your hands if you have an iPad. So, that being said, thank you guys and girls out there for watching. AJ, any parting words?